Let's talk more about the impact of those furloughs on air travel. Seth Kaplan is the managing partner of Airline Weekly, a subscription-based publication on the airline industry. Seth, good morning to you.
Good morning, Carl.
We've had Gary Kelly from Southwest on our air this morning, and it's clear the frustration regarding all of this is bubbling up, not just to flyers, but obviously to the heads of all these big airline carriers.
Absolutely, and Gary's airline, Southwest, is particularly impacted because so much of Southwest's business is about carrying people between cities that aren't all that far apart. Cities where if you had to jump in a car and drive, you could. Of course, people in the Northeast, sometimes the train is an option, and those are the trips that are most impacted by this sort of thing. But here we are Thursday morning now with the weekend just a few days away and a whole different set of travelers about to potentially get exposed to this. It's been business travelers during the week, people who grin and bear it and move on even if they're not happy. But when you have kids in tow, obviously a whole different story. People are going to be upset. And part of the thing to watch is who are they going to blame? That's going to then translate into the politics of it and sort of who has to blink in the end and perhaps do a deal.
What is your read on politicians' willingness at this point to find some way to solve it other than changing the approach routes to various airports, for instance?
Right. Well, this will not last forever. I mean, this is a solvable problem. And in this country, usually we solve problems that we can, even if we don't get it done the most efficient way possible. You know, there certainly is the possibility we see proposals in Congress right now to do some kind of a short-term fix, give the FAA more flexibility, perhaps even shift some money from elsewhere in the Department of Transportation. So certainly, you know, part of it's going to depend on if one party or the other feels like the public is turning on that party. If we remember back with the fiscal cliff, the Republicans kind of sensed that the public was blaming them more, and they ended up doing a deal. In this case, you have the White House basically saying, hey, this is your sequester, Congress, but Republicans and certainly some airlines as well saying there are far less impactful ways to deal with this, to cut the costs without impacting the public. If the public buys that argument, then that's where I think we'll see some sort of a deal that lets the FAA reallocate resources, stop impacting the public as much, you know, recall those traffic controllers that are on furlough and maybe put off some longer-term projects.
Is it obvious to you? I mean, the layperson would look at this and say, obviously, a Southwest is going to be affected more than maybe any other carrier because of the number of cycles they have, right? They're a short-haul airline, a lot of takeoffs and landings. Is it clear to you that they are going to feel the brunt of this more than anyone else?
Yeah, you know, Southwest's biggest revenue market, by all appearances anyway, is Houston, Dallas. So that gives you a kind of idea of, you know, you can drive from Houston to Dallas. You know, you can't drive from New York to Paris or from Los Angeles to Hawaii. So certainly some more impact there. Now, on the other hand, they don't have as much exposure to the very most congested airports in the Northeast. So, you know, if you're JetBlue, let's say, on one hand, you're happy to be dealing with those 1,000-mile flights where people probably aren't going to hop in the car instead if they are going to travel at all, but on the other hand, you're more exposed to that. So everybody feels it, but certainly in terms of any kind of structural shift where you have people saying, I don't want to deal with the airport anymore, it is those short-term flights that are most impacted. That happened back after 9/11, by the way, with the TSA security hassles, and that didn't totally recover. Southwest got rid of some of their very shortest routes simply because people sort of pushed out that barrier. They said, you know, if the flight is 4 or 5 hours, or if the drive rather would be 4 or 5 hours, yeah, I'll fly. But if it's only about a 3-hour drive, I might drive or take the train instead.
Finally, Seth, what's the likelihood that airlines use this as an excuse for just inefficient operations, the kind we know they have all the time? The way retailers use weather as an excuse when the results aren't that hot.
Yeah, well, we have a lot of people using it as an excuse, right? We have the White House obviously saying it's the sequester, Republicans in Congress and airlines saying that this could be done differently. And yes, absolutely. You know, airlines, to their credit, by the way, had finally been running a rather reliable operation. A few airlines, you know, Delta and U.S. Airways in particular, had been putting up some really good numbers. So especially those airlines. United was a little bit messy last year and has been recovering. But, you know, if you see Delta and U.S. Airways, for example, suddenly become very unreliable, then that tells you that it probably is what's going on now because they had been running rather reliable operations.
Yeah, certainly lately. Seth, it's something everybody who flies has to at least think about. Thanks so much for your time.
Absolutely.
Seth Kaplan,
Thank you.
Airline Weekly.